the developments coming out today on the legal clash that is testing Trump's demands for more executive power. And it is really captured and symbolized by these images, which I'm going to leave up for a moment as we start the week. It's an effort that the president is waging by testing how far he can get, ducking and defying Supreme Court orders, including ruling against what you see in the middle of your screen. Because the United States under Trump erroneously sent that detainee, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, to the wrong foreign prison. And a Democratic senator who you see there just met with him after having to face down two governments, a foreign one and our own, in the version of the Trump executive branch, who were working together to hide that individual, which has now sparked an extraordinary clash inside the United States court system. And so I'm going to give you right now all of the information on this, some of it quite concerning, some of it suggesting Trump has already gone too far, and that's according to people who generally share some of his legal philosophies. So let's start here. Today, I can tell you Mr. Garcia remains stuck erroneously in El Salvador. I could tell you this deportation clash is now rocking all three branches of the United States government. And that senator who visited him and relayed that Garcia was moved to a different detention center is on the march. Senator Van Hollen says, after doing the work, pushing this as far as it could go, leaving the United States to go to that country and return, Van Hollen says the line has clearly been crossed. He says the Trump administration is flouting the Supreme Court order, meaning defying it, and illegally pressing on. He argues that Trump officials have admitted they are doing, quote, nothing to facilitate the return as ordered.
They are very much flouting the courts as we speak. As the courts have said, facilitating his return means something more than doing nothing. And they are doing nothing. Yes, they're absolutely in violation of the court orders as we speak.
Violation of the court orders. Now, let's just take this piece by piece. It is important. What you just heard there is clearly Senator Van Hollen's view. You might agree with it, might sound logical, but that's the senator's view of this clash. I can also report that on this case, the Garcia part, we do not yet know if the Supreme Court agrees. If, in other words, the Supreme Court thinks that the Trump administration has, at a provable level, at the court level of evidence, been obviously dishonest and defied their order. Trump aides say, though, they will not return Garcia. They claim they don't have to. And so we don't know whether they will view that the way Van Hollen and many others do as defiance, or whether the Supreme Court could view those claims from those Trump officials as the kind of possible outcome that was implied in the original ruling, that the ruling was worded broadly, facilitate, and that it gave the administration room. Indeed, we covered that possibility the very night the first order came down, in those first minutes. So all eyes are now on Chief Justice Roberts for what is the large, probably unavoidable test of whether centuries of independent Supreme Court authority will wither and die on his watch. If Roberts cannot find the legal backbone or strategy to stand up with the majority over the long haul here to protect the court's independent authority, then we could see that. He has to face the reality of dealing with this particular politician in the actual way this is going to continue to go down in this Trump era. Roberts cannot maintain the court's authority merely through the purple prose of high-minded written opinions if they are not carried out to actually stand up to the would-be autocratic claims here. Now, for his part, and I mentioned this in our coverage last week, if you happen to catch it, President Trump has started to verbally backtrack. He has started to claim he's not involved in the deportation details, which might be a sign that he needs to maintain some room for what he could see as the kind of loss that officials will not be able to defy. And a MAGA Republican ally, Senator Kennedy, is now claiming all of this by Trump was a mistake in the administration. The White House doesn't want to pay for admitting that, he argues. That might sound logical. I'm going to actually play the quote from Senator Kennedy on Meet the Press in a second. But before I do, I always like to give you the facts so you can make sense of these things. Recall that the administration already admitted it was a mistake, an error. An administrative error was the term they used. They said so in court. So that already happened, which means they're paying whatever cost there is for that. And the reason it looks like the administration wants to go further, to invite this clash or test or defiance with the courts, is precisely why it would appear that so many Trump officials admit the error and still won't return the detainee to fix the error.
It was a screw up, and I understand why the administration is bowed up and said we won't admit it's a mistake, because if they do, they'll have their throats torn out. But it was a screw up. I don't see any pattern here.
Senator Kennedy says he does not see a pattern. Okay. But he also says he doesn't see them admitting the mistake, which, fact check please, which they did, which you know if you've been following the news or listening to this report, as I showed you that before. It helps to sometimes sandwich what we get from the politicians with the facts that we have. They did admit the error, but they're trying to continue to seize wartime powers on the same basis to deport others without due process or rights. So going into this weekend, the administration was trying to deport other people in a similar manner, but this time to Venezuela on that same theory that they used for El Salvador. If you're keeping track, under the Trump administration's claims, things they actually say out loud in court, they claim emergency wartime powers for wars with El Salvador and Venezuela right now. Let's keep it simple. We've got those countries' flags up. Now, are we at war with those countries? Feels like you'd know about that if we were. To be extra clear and not just sort of argumentative, I will report for you, in reality, the United States is not at war with either country. And legally, Congress has not declared war with either country or any affiliated non-state organizations related to those territories, if you want to be really technical. No declaration of war. I mention that because it is one of the legal requirements to invoke these grave wartime powers that the Trump administration was trying to use, including going into this weekend. I told you I'd stay on the evidence, keep it simple. So let's keep going straightforward. Those are, by any measure, foreign policy, legal, historical, those are extreme, obvious power grabs beyond the law. And that's coupled with the original alleged flouting or dodging, if you want to be as charitable as possible, of the Supreme Court ruling to facilitate one person's return. So, here we are. Is this Supreme Court just completely surrendering already? Well, depending on how closely you follow the news during the weekend, you may already have a clue. If you're catching up now, which is perfectly fine, Monday's a good day to catch up, right? Can't do it 24/7. Even the news people don't do it 24/7. They have to sleep. If you're catching up now Monday evening to start the week, here is the legal answer. No. This court is not completely surrendering in advance on this now main skirmish. This deportation and immigration wartime powers thing might be the big first test in these 100 days. The court has clearly been vexed at how to handle Trump's extreme actions in these 90 days or so, give or take. But in a last-minute weekend action, which shows that the justices had to interrupt their own lives to step up to this challenge, and by the way, everyone in government knows all about Friday night news dumps and ploys, right? It's a news thing, but it relates back to what the government's doing. It happens more in government than some other fields. I'm sure you've heard of it, Friday night news dump, right? Pushing on something controversial that you want to get through and hopefully get less attention and news, and less news and attention means maybe you'll get away with it. But in this past weekend's action, the Supreme Court used its power to stop the Trump administration from any such new deportations under the same war claims I just mentioned. The court stepped in at the 11th hour, and as I mentioned, if you follow all your alerts over the weekend, you might have heard this, but I want to put it in the full context for you right now. The High Court blocking any more Trump deportations under that power and telling federal officials not to remove any detainees from the U.S. A rare, overnight, short ruling. Some interpreting this as the High Court now finding that its patience is running thin, losing patience with these type of Trump ploys and actions, which would, on their face, and now according to the Supreme Court, defy quite obvious laws and limits that are established. Not some new tough question, but past court precedents. So this weekend ruling sets a pause on Trump trying to invoke, or many say abuse, the Wartime Alien Enemies Act. It also could suggest skepticism among some of the justices for the whole case, not on the emergency basis of can you move these folks on and off the buses and the planes this weekend, but can you do it ever? Can you say you're at war with those countries and do it? Because these have been emergency sort of quick rulings on steps. This is not what they call the final merits ruling, the thing where you have the whole briefing and the oral argument, and then you have the people running out with the decision, and we're not there yet. As for the president's publicly stated view that he sees this court, the Roberts Court, as basically partisan, MAGA, and transactional, that he wants the judges he appointed to back him, well, the legal news here shows some appointees disagree with that. Some of his appointees. All three of the justices that Trump appointed to the Supreme Court went against him, against these deportation powers on an emergency basis this weekend. So justices are using their authority to stop some of these Trump moves. Indeed, the only dissenting views that were on Trump's side, you see there, only two. So he was nowhere near winning this thing. And they're from Republican appointees who are noted for some extreme legal views that predate Trump. Those losing side dissents come from Justice Thomas and Alito. Alito making the fairly non-legal argument that he thinks issuing the order at midnight was not necessary or appropriate. Now, there's not much of a precedent about saying what time of day the court can rule. There's not a lot of clock case law. But when government action is imminent, as it was here, the courts are always faced with a fairly rushed decision to act or not. As I mentioned, that could be a weekend decision off the Friday night news dump thing. It could be for other reasons. It could be emergency appeals or deadlines. Last-minute actions are either going to get ruled on, which give them some color of law, or they won't be, which then can reward a government, in this case, Donald Trump, for trying to act in manners that involve speed or secrecy to evade oversight. It was a short and quick ruling, but Alito's emphasis on the clock almost suggests buying into that type of legal tactic by this Trump DOJ. Now, remember, the whole clash here grew out of the Friday news and emergency hearing I mentioned, the planned deportations, which started with government buses that were seen here in Texas. The news was covering this Friday, including right here on the beat. The judge took the ACLU appeal on behalf of those Venezuelans that were believed to be held in Texas, affected by those bus routes, over what was an apparently attempted imminent removal with no time or proper due process. During the hearing, the buses began taking about 28 detainees to the airport. NBC was reporting on that. We have the footage that shows them departing that Texas detention center, passing the airport's exit, and then abruptly turning around. If you could boil down the rule of law to the actual physical observation of the treatment of these individuals, well, you would have that footage right there. So what the president tried on late Friday was stopped over the weekend. Stopped in the most finite, frankly, imminent and dramatic way that the courts intervene. And if you follow the news, you probably remember that courts start at the district level and there's appeals. The Supreme Court does not and is not built to weigh in every Friday night or weekend on every emergency measure. And yet that is part of what it has to do if it is going to keep up with these efforts to, according to an overwhelming majority of the court, evade the plain letter of the law, the limits on wartime powers, and what the court has already said against Trump. So we are witnessing, as I told you moments ago, a shift from where we were Friday to where we are on Monday night on a larger majority of the Supreme Court saying no to Trump, at least on the efforts to duck and evade. And there are many other signs beyond the formal government activity that these actions are opposed across the country. Trump's approval rating has dropped already below his share of the vote that he won in November. 44% means even his own supporters, some of them have a kind of buyer's remorse or just don't approve of this stuff. The trade war has been plunging the stock market. It had more losses today as Trump feuds with the Fed chair. You can compare it to other presidencies. It's not very good. Trump also faces his lowest approval on the economy ever. And those are just the broad snapshots. Then there's how this is playing out. Supreme Court is, of course, the law of the land at the top. There are other elite institutions that have had to face what Trump is doing and make their call. Harvard pushed back, and today they're pushing back further. having risked their funding to take a stand against government Trump meddling. They're now suing the Trump administration, putting him on the back foot in a court landscape with the Supreme Court skeptical, at least, of some of the overreach. And while few presidents see mass protests in their first 100 days, few presidents have run their first, say, 90 days like Trump, which is why we see these reports, according to organizers, of when you count the national protests, it topping millions. Towns and cities across the country. That includes some large cities, but also smaller areas in red states, ranging from Harrisburg to Little Rock, with the economic problems and the Trump-Musk cuts driving some of this, because that hits people's pocketbooks. Calls to deal with this with more of a direct approach. Calls against kings in America. This weekend shows the point of concern over Trump flouting the courts or disappearing people, like I've just been telling you about. Let's take some of this actually in full, because we can see this is what it looks like. This is happening out there. Some people are too busy. Some people are trying to earn a living, but other people are coming out and making their voices heard. We might be seeing the beginning of an even wider resistance coalition. We're seeing calls to impeach and remove. That's in San Francisco. In South Carolina, we saw a protester tapping Sunday's Easter theme. A little more light-hearted way to say hop away from fascism. The Simpsons character Ralph starring in a sign noting his catchphrase, "I'm in danger." You can see that there in the middle. While signs warn democracy dies in silence in Michigan.
Donald Trump has got to go.
Hands off our democracy, hands off women's health care, hands off, to be honest, there's too many things to list.
Everyone should have due process.
We are here because we are fighting against the oligarchs and the billionaire class.
Our leaders need to stand up to Trump and get Elon Musk out of our government.
You shouldn't just be able to decide what the laws are, to disappear people.
We're going to wind up in a major depression.
Due process has been abandoned for everybody. It can be abandoned for you.
Fact check, true. Due process, human rights, whether you have rights before the government you face, which could involve how you're treated, whether you can speak, whether you can connect with the lawyer that you're afforded a right to have, or whether you're disappeared abroad. If it could happen to one, it can happen to many. If it can happen to many, it can happen to any. These are old bedrock themes. I've mentioned to you in our coverage that the United States has not always perfectly upheld them. Indeed, there are many lessons in how the governments of the past have tried to deny this to some, and how some of America's best moments are when we came together, regardless of creed, color, or belief system, and actually stood for the principle that they are deserved and required for all. So yes, the man who continues to rot away in a foreign prison or detention center that the U.S. government under Trump admits he is not supposed to be in, he is not just one person who you can care about, although many of his advocates say they care about him and you should. But at the broader level, what the Supreme Court is now actually getting into on an emergency weekend basis and what the protesters are talking about is this test. History is usually messy, not neat. And when you're in it, it's hard to know when the exact inflection points are coming. My job is to report to you what's happening with the evidence we have and some context. And what I'm reporting to you is what's happening is a heck of a lot of people, from a majority of the Supreme Court, including Trump appointees, to the protesters all across the land, are coming together to say the line has been crossed and we as a country must step up.